Greetings from our Westminster studios, where we're joined by a live audience and a stellar panel of guests. We'll be discussing the deeply concerning Omicron variant and what new restrictions might be put in place to deal with it and combat it. Are these going to be proportionate and reasonable, as government sources are claiming? We might well be finding out live on air. And do these new restrictions and this new variant mean that vaccine mandates or passports will be implemented in Britain as they have been in parts of the European Union? And what should we make of the government's war on drugs? All of that coming up on tonight's Live with Littlewood. I've got another stellar panel of guests to talk through things, and we're going to get some live reaction from whatever the government's going to announce, because if some of what we've heard is true, this could be our last in-person event here at the IA in 2021, and we have a great panel to talk us through all of the key issues as they unfold and what's been happening over the course of the week. If you're enjoying the show, please hit the like, thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and if you've got a few pennies spare, please consider becoming an IEA online patron. Details are in the show notes below. Later in the show, I'll be joined by City AM comment and features editor Sascha O'Sullivan, and also be joined by the director of Big Brother Watch, Silkie Carlo, to talk about vaccine mandates, amongst other things. But first off, to talk us through today's news and recent events, it's a great pleasure to be welcomed by the Member of Parliament for Buckingham and one of the co-chairs of the Free Market Forum, Greg Smith, and the IEA's very own Head of Regulatory Affairs, Victoria Hewson. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Great, good to see you. How are you? How are you? Victoria, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. So, the Omicron, this is the big argument of the day, how you pronounce this thing, isn't it? Just when we thought it was just about safe to get back to normal, state restrictions look like they're going to be a bigger feature of our day-to-day lives. The Prime Minister cruelly has scheduled his own press conference for this exact slot of time, but we'll get the breaking news coming in as we see it. But a fair amount of this has been trailed already. Work from home requirements, or at least advice, possibility of vaccine passports, at least for major events or nightclub, possibility of travel restrictions. I understand that might be announced separately. It's been estimated that this Plan B could cost the economy £18 billion if it runs until March next year. It's been 143 days since Freedom Day, and here we go again. Greg, great to have you with us as a legislator and parliamentarian. On a scale from thrilled to incandescent with rage, where are you about now?
I think we're down in the rage category. I voted against mandatory vaccination for care home workers. I voted against pushing Freedom Day back before the summer. I voted against the additional mask mandates and the additional isolating restrictions last week, and I've already told my whip that, I mean, it's very good timing of them to put this statement on while I'm here with you to get me out of the chamber of the House of Commons, but I've already told my whip that, you know, I'm not going to vote for any more destruction of liberties, taking away of our freedoms, especially when we look around the world and people aren't getting seriously ill of Omicron. They're not dying of Omicron. Mm-hmm. Yes, it looks like it's more infectious, but if it has evolved, if it has mutated to the point that it's a very, very mild disease that doesn't make you unwell, well, case rates surely shouldn't matter anymore. And just as the Prime Minister himself has said all along, we've got to learn to live with this virus and actually focus our effort on economic recovery and also on getting the treatment to the thousands, and I'm afraid it is tens of thousands of people who are sat with undiagnosed cancers, undiagnosed serious diseases, who've been too frightened to go to the doctor when they found a lump or another symptom of a cancer, and are potentially going to pay a very, very high price for it.
Victoria, you're a very calm, calculated person. Where are you on the thrilled to incandescent with rage spectrum?
I would say I'm actually more just weary and depressed about this, and you know, frankly, the vindication of having been right in my opposition to all of this from the get-go is not giving me very much comfort. I think it's slightly showing that people, especially on our side, I actually don't blame politicians so much, because there was obviously a very politically charged environment and a feeling of emergency, which I think slightly does let you guys off the hook more. But I think people like us in think tanks on the liberal side, the small government side, who somehow thought we would get away with just a little bit of authoritarianism and just enough collectivism for just the right amount of time, and that somehow we could trust the government to dial up and down our freedoms in a technocratic utopia to control a virus. I think, that's clearly...
You may have been vindicated. It might be a bit like what Hayek says about inflation. Once the tiger escapes, you can't catch it.
I was thinking exactly that, actually, today, as this was all being discussed. And the other sort of Hayek aphorism that applies is also the pretense of knowledge. This idea that we have that technocrats and public health officials can control all of this by pulling policy levers based on models is and also, the plan B, as it was elaborated a few months ago, as we were leaving the last round of restrictions, was supposed to kick in response to the NHS coming under unsustainable pressure.
Yeah.
Now, cleverly enough, of course, they didn't put any metrics around what would be considered to be unsustainable
Highly
pressure.
subjective opinion.
So, let's see, because as far as I'm aware, the NHS isn't under any greater pressure now than it has been actually for several months.
Greg, coming back to you, so what I've lost track of a bit now is, and forgive me for saying this, how important are you as an MP? Isn't this all under statutory instruments and everything else? I mean, could Parliament theoretically reject this? What's the feeling like amongst your colleagues on the Conservative benches or indeed on other benches?
Yeah, well, we've learned today there'll be a vote next Tuesday on this. I will certainly be in the no lobby. I think there'll be a lot of Conservative backbenchers in the no lobby, and it wouldn't actually surprise me if we actually started to see some on the payroll starting to peel off on this, particularly on the vaccine passports point. There has been a lot of very strong speeches, very strong questions from people who have PPS roles, who have junior ministerial roles around the vaccine passport issue. And if that is announced today, because it is part of Plan B, if the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary do propose that, I think there's going to be a pretty vicious kickback on it. However, there is a parliamentary arithmetic problem. We know that the SNP are pretty hooked on authoritarianism. You can see what the Scottish government has been doing. They've always been harsher in the restriction of freedoms than we've been in England. The SNP are very unlikely to vote against these measures. And Labour, well, they call themselves the opposition. The real opposition to all of the COVID restrictions, the way that this pandemic has been handled, has actually come predominantly from the Conservative backbenches in the form of the COVID recovery group. So I wouldn't bet the house on Labour unless they want to play a more political game and try and defeat the government in a vote in the House of Commons. I can see them just rolling over and having their tummies tickled as they have on all the other COVID restrictions.
Calling for more, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, no, I mean, it's been a notable feature, I think, of the last year or so that the opposition in Parliament has typically come from behind the Prime Minister rather than opposite him. Yeah. I want to pick up on Victoria's point with you, Greg, because a bit of this, and Victoria will blame me and others of our IEA colleagues for not having been tough enough throughout, but my mindset has changed. At the outset of this, when it first happened, and people could reasonably say, we don't really know what this thing is yet, we don't really know how dangerous it is yet, let's lock down. And I kind of thought, well, you've got this argument you might buy time, you've got the argument the NHS might be overwhelmed. Then you had the argument that, well, actually, let's buy some time for the vaccine to roll out when we brilliantly, that was discovered by these brilliant scientists. And again, I could just about say, all right, well, let's buy a bit of time for that. What are we now buying time for? Where are it's not just the goalposts that have moved. We've moved to a totally different football stadium, haven't we?
No, look, absolutely. And let's have a look at the last few months. Scotland and Wales have had harsher restrictions than England has had, certainly for the last couple of months. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that actually they've had worse case rates than England has with a freer society. Likewise, we know from the press release from Pfizer this morning that they believe 3 doses of their vaccine works effective against Omicron. We know that from South Africa and from the cases that we've got in this country and other places around the world, nobody has died of this variant. Nobody, not one. and it looks like it's a very mild illness. So we've got this fantastic vaccination programme where millions of people have received their jabs, rolled out thanks to the private sector developing it at great pace across the country and in many other countries in the world. Let's put our faith in that. Let's live with this virus that's going to be with us forever, that will carry on mutating, and get on with our lives.
Yeah. Well, we're already hearing some of the breaking news from the press conference. From Monday, we're going to be told to work from home if you can. I mean, the vagaries there. And we're told that this variant could double in the UK in 2.5 to 3.5 days. But we said sort of it's not obvious that's a disastrous thing. On your point, Greg, about where are the threats here? We've been comparing here at the IEA the amount of deaths due to this new variant, compared it to other causes. These are the number of people who, on average, we obviously haven't gone through every death certificate, will have died across the world in the last 2 weeks. 61,538 deaths from car accidents, 15,384 murders. On average, 96 left-handed people would have died using products designed for right-handed people. 17 deaths from falling out of bed. And depending on how hungry they were, there are 2 deaths from shark attacks every 10 weeks, roughly, across the world. Deaths by Omicron across the globe as we speak, 0. Yeah. I mean, there couldn't be a clearer justification that this is an overreaction. The government should be doing more to prevent some shark attacks, shouldn't it?
Well, I mean, we've got to take shark attacks very seriously. They're in waters around England now for all sorts of reasons. I think what we're going to be told, and obviously I can't predict what the PM is saying right now, is there was some scaremongering from various public health officials earlier saying we could be looking at 1,000 hospitalisations a day. Well, I don't know where they're plucking that fact out from, because it's certainly not evident in any of the countries that we see this variant live. I'm sure that there will be some argument around, well, just in case, precautionary principle, but we've basically got 2 years worth of knowledge of this thing now. We know from the last few months that we can successfully run an economy, run a country with, be it the Delta variant, in circulation. So I just don't buy it. I think the public health world need to be pushed back in their box a little bit. We need to say, yes, of course new viruses are serious things, and of course we need the scientific probing of them and analysis of them and ensuring that vaccines are as effective as they can be against them. But that should not come at the cost of freedom. That should not come at the cost of the economy. And it certainly should not come at the cost of mental health of our population, particularly children's mental health. And if there's one
Which has been terribly hit by schools.
If there's one thing that has frightened me more than anything else over this pandemic, it has been the stories of the massive spikes in self-harm amongst secondary age children, students. The huge hit to the early years. I have a lockdown son myself. My second child was born in January 2020, and his development is noticeably different, having basically been stuck at home for his first year, than my other 2 children. That is a ticking time bomb as that generation of children come up through the school system and their learning and their development and socialisation going forward. Their mental health, it really hurts.
And we'll see basically all of the downsides of these lockdowns we'll probably see over a long term and will be disparate, whereas the supposed upsides you see immediately. Victoria, we're getting some of the information coming through live from the Prime Minister's press conference. The Prime Minister says it is, quote, proportionate and responsible to move to Plan B in England. Face masks will be back from Friday in theatres and cinemas. Vaccine passports or a negative lateral flow test for nightclubs and large venues. I guess that will include me going to Southampton Football Club. Masks will not be required in schools, it seems. Victoria, is this roughly what you were expecting and feared? And you can now blame me and the other wets at the IEA for not agreeing with you earlier.
I mean, this basically is what was proposed in Plan B. It's interesting, this idea that it's proportionate has really never been tested. The government, I don't think any government, apart from the government of the Netherlands, who produced a cost-benefit analysis and then sort of shelved it because it was a bit embarrassing, no governments have properly done cost-benefit analyses of any of these programs of measures. And when academic economists, have tried to do their own versions of it, the results have been breathtaking, with the costs outweighing the benefits by orders of magnitude. And I presume that this, in fact, isn't why the government is doing it, is not doing it, because there must be a sort of tacit understanding that it wouldn't stack up. I believe they did actually do an equality impact assessment for one particular round of measures, but have refused to disclose it in response to a Freedom of Information request. Again, presumably because the outcome would not look good. And, you know, again, I'd very much like to see some evidence base for the assertion that this is proportionate. Because let's recall, there are no longer the economic supports in place. So if people are now worried enough to cancel holidays, cancel parties, cancel gatherings and dinners, then that's going to have a huge hit in the hospitality industry at their most important time of year. We don't have furlough and economic support in place anymore for these people. It's terrifying for them.
Greg, I've got a couple of questions for you. Firstly, where and why is this coming from? And I mean, I thought only a couple of days ago I was hearing from cabinet ministers, no need for Plan B. Plan B's suddenly been implemented. I mean, if something's happened this afternoon about this Omicron variant, then, you know, I'm not sure what's happened. Where is the pressure for this coming from? And when does it ever end? I mean, when does this ever come to a conclusion?
I think that is the $64,000 question, isn't it? I suspect that this pressure is coming from multiple places. It will definitely be coming from the public health establishment. SAGE have been particularly assiduous bedwetters throughout this entire pandemic, and they're going to have done it again, and they're going to be putting all sorts of scary graphs and, you know, the sort of things I'm sure Chris Whitty is presenting right now in the press conference that show that we are all doomed, when it only takes a few of us, such as on this panel right now, to take the most cursory glance at the data to see that that's just not the case, and the public health establishment are not getting the pushback by ministers. They're getting it from the COVID recovery group. They're not getting it from ministers that needs to happen. And that's where actually Parliament does need to reassert itself. And even if we're not going to win the votes, it is vitally important, as I'm absolutely sure that colleagues like Mark Harper and Steve Baker and Des Swain are doing right now in the chamber of the House of Commons, really pressuring the Health Secretary on where this data is coming from, where this pressure is really coming from, and asking, as Victoria said, for the impact assessments. We've been asking for those for 18 months. The closest we got was earlier this year, and we got 6 sides of A4 that, in a manner that only a civil servant can, said precisely nothing about the actual impacts of all of those lockdown restrictions. So I think the blame needs to be put clearly at the door of the public health establishment, but the timing of this is also a little bit suspicious, given the rest of the news cycle.
I mean, I think it was one of your colleagues, unnamed earlier, I saw that this is the biggest dead cat on the table distraction, you know, from the Christmas party thing. But surely to God, the government's not so out of control that it introduces wide-ranging restrictions on freedom just to change whatever the top story is on the news, really?
Well, surely it also just amplifies that story more than distracting from it. So I find that quite hard to swallow. But I do think, to Greg's point, there are certain interest groups now, let's say, who do have an interest, both in extending the power of the state, which is why clearly the Labour Party is quite up for all of this, and trades unions, teachers' unions, and the health service unions are like the doctors' trades union, the BMA, are all very, very keen on all of this because it gives them more and more leverage and increases the size of the state. It gives them more leverage to lobby for more funding in their preferred areas, as well as in the case of teachers, dare I say, you know, they don't have to go to school.
Sure. No, there's a lot of interest on that side. Victoria, I know you need to leave us very shortly, but let me just get one final thought from you then. I mean, do you think there might be a public pushback at some point? I mean, perhaps not because people start reading New Scientist magazine or whatever, but because they've just lost faith in the system now. You know, we still don't know all of the details about the Downing Street Christmas party and all of the ins and outs of that. But there must be, my guess would be, I haven't seen any polling evidence, there must be a growing feeling amongst people that, well, hang on, if these rules are not being abided by, clearly and consistently, and we had the Matt Hancock scandal earlier in the year, it can't be that serious. Why should I take them that seriously?
I think certainly lockdown scepticism is becoming much more mainstream than it has been before. I don't think mask mandates are being adhered to as strictly as they were, or perhaps people are just more confident in their ability to use exemptions than they were before, let's say. And I mean, let's be clear, we're not talking about lockdowns, we're not talking about not allowing people to visit their family and all of that kind of thing. But I suspect if those kinds of rules or guidance were to be brought in, they would be quite widely ignored, not least because elderly people and families just don't want to live like that. What's the point of prolonging the life spans of our elderly if they're going to spend it in loneliness and misery on their own, and their care workers have been sacked because they didn't have a vaccine? So I think there will be more pushback as we go.
We're just hearing as well that the requirement for if you Omicron contacts to self-isolate for up to 10 days has been replaced by daily COVID tests. The idea here is it should reduce the risk of another pandemic. I don't know any further details there. I guess the idea is if you test negative, you can get out faster. So, I mean, a pretty small silver lining on a very big cloud. Greg, stay with us. Victoria, I know you need to leave us, so have a very, very Merry Christmas.
Thanks very much. Let's hope it is.
Let's hope it is. That's as merry as you can do in these circumstances. Victoria, thanks very much. And we're now going to be joined by a new guest to the show. Sascha Sullivan is the City AM comment and features editor, so please give a very, very warm welcome to Sascha. Hi. Sascha, come and take a seat. They can mic you up while you're here. Sascha, good to see you. Have a seat while they're miking you up. I'll come back to Greg on this. Are you and your other parliamentary colleagues going to be at least making sure this is time limited in some way? I mean, we've been saying that the evidence has been rolling in for the past couple of years. Presumably on this new variant, we're going to see it rolling in. You know, each day provides you a lot more insight. You know, when I first heard of this, I don't know, seems to transmit more, but is it killing more people? Seems not. I mean, shouldn't we be, revisiting these restrictions, I don't know, every 48 hours for sake of argument?
Well, that'd be a lot better than what we've got at the moment, and I see no reason why these new restrictions wouldn't fit in with this framework. The current wider package of restrictions goes to, I think it's the 24th of March next year, and that's just far too long in the future for me, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I voted against the new isolation measures last week. I think the daily testing is an imposition, but it's certainly better than being sent home for 10 days at a time. But what we've got to see in the detail of that is what sort of test. Is that a lateral flow that you can do relatively quickly at home?
Or is somebody else going to make a fortune out of PCR?
Absolutely. Or if you've got to go through the whole rigmarole of a daily PCR test, which is actually quite a big deal by the time you've done it, it's been to the lab, etc. So that is certainly better. It is less of an imposition, but it is still a pretty big ask of people. To be fair, I've been doing mostly daily, certainly 3-4 times a week, lateral flows anyway to come into Westminster. That's fine. They've all been negative, not a problem. But there's got to be a time limit, as you say, on this. And if it's rolling through to the end of March, that's just ridiculous.
Sascha, what's your take of this? Welcome. I'm glad we got a mic on you.
Good to be here.
Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. What's your take? What's City AM's take going to be on this unveiling of Plan B, which we were told just a couple of days ago wasn't necessary?
I mean, look, I think I broadly agree in terms of there definitely needs to be some sense of how long this thing is going on for. Just saying, we're introducing work from home, we're introducing all these new rules, but we actually can't tell you when it's going to end. Or even have a sense of, during the other lockdowns, there were constant reviews of it. We did hear about it a lot of the time, almost every day. And I think that the concern is the justification for lockdowns, for COVID restrictions, has always been, we wait until we get the vaccine. And what I don't see here is any sense of end game,
Yeah.
of this is what we need to do
Yeah.
to actually roll these things back, because it can't be that we just sit back and wait for hopefully a milder variant to come along and
Yeah.
tear apart the other one. That's not a way to run a government. That's not a way to
Although
run
there
a
might
economy.
actually be, oddly enough, what is happening, right?
Yes, it might be, but and you know, even the justification for bringing in these restrictions now, I think people do see the case for masks, and I think there is an element, as you say, testing. I think people kind of understand that there is going to be some kind of imposition on the liberties, but you know, there wasn't a clear sense of COVID hospitalizations, deaths are spiraling out of control. I don't think
No, they're not
it's
at all.
necessarily
Not the
the
case.
time. But also, we're about to run into Christmas. A lot of people in the city certainly will end up working from home for a couple of weeks anyway, I suspect. So it does feel like an odd time to be doing it.
Yeah, very strange. And Greg, do you think on that? So I hadn't appreciated that we haven't got the details yet, but the default was it would run through till March. You're saying, I mean, is that remotely sustainable? If by the middle of January, you know, the hospitals are coping fine, nobody's in hospital with this variant, nobody's died of it. I mean, it would be the precautionary principle gone mad to say, let's do another 2 months of this. I mean,
Absolutely. When we had the restrictions brought in last week, they were supposed to be reviewed after 3 weeks. So I am hopeful, we don't know, we haven't had confirmation, I'm hopeful there will be a similar, hopefully shorter than 3 week gap for these restrictions to be reviewed. And whilst I'm going to vote against these coming in come what may, I will equally press and push to make sure that these things are being reviewed before we all come back to work. Well, hopefully before Christmas, but certainly before we all come back to work after the Christmas break in the new year.
Sascha, I want to ask about your native Australia. The Australian government gave up on their zero COVID policy.
Yes.
I mean, it seems to me as almost the British government by stealth is now pursuing a zero COVID policy. They announced them at the end of most restrictions once vaccination rates in Australia hit 80%. The UK's already hit that point. The Australian government will now retain a looser COVID policy unless hospitals can no longer cope with cases. Have the Aussies now finally gone to the more liberal wing of this, and we find ourselves trading places with you on the authoritarian side of the ledger?
I think for the UK to pursue a policy of zero COVID would be extraordinary, just given, frankly, how many cases we have. It would take a lot.
Yeah.
And look, the thing with Australian COVID restrictions is they do differ state to state. And, there are some states which have quarantine in place, there are some which don't. There's Western Australia, which has kind of just said we're leaving the world entirely and have a nice life. I, thankfully, will be able to go back to Sydney next weekend.
You're hoping, yeah.
But I am hoping, and I do think
Depending on what comes to this press conference, you might be locked in here with us for the entire Christmas period. We'll have a good laugh, I promise you. But
not over Christmas parties, though. No, I think there's a sense of trepidation in Australia as much as there is anywhere else in the world about what this is going to look like. And because Australia has been known for kind of insane knee-jerk reactions, there is definitely a sense of what do we do about this, because they just managed to grapple with the whole Delta thing. But they have, to their credit, said we're not pursuing a zero Omicron strategy.
Well, but you say to their credit, I mean, that would be utterly mad, right? I mean,
I've been kind of battered and bruised by 2 years of Australia. I'll be grateful for anything at this point. So, yeah.
Well, Greg, we're still waiting for more of the sort of details to come out. But I've now lost sight of what the policy is, because it changes so much and so often, and it now just seems to be, well, we should do this to be cautious. The justification from the Prime Minister we heard is it's proportionate and responsible, but the first of those should be measurable, and I don't think he's given any particular way to measure it. So I'm worried now that they're, actually in the, when we finally came out of lockdown in July, although I didn't approve of the way it was done, you could actually see some, gateways or signposts or whatever they were called. Not obvious these have been signalled particularly yet.
Certainly not yet, not that we've seen. We need real metrics. We need to understand where at least the public health establishment want this to go in order for them to say it's okay, given that's where all of this is coming from. But 3 weeks to flatten the curve seems like a very, very long time ago now, and yet Christmas 2021, we are still in this thing. And the most important thing for me is actually to try and get the government back, to get the Prime Minister back to the irreversible roadmap, as he used to call it. Turns out it is reversible after all, and to get back to the language of learning to live with, because that's exactly what we've done with countless viruses and diseases over the centuries in this country. The case mortality rate of COVID is now not dissimilar to that of the winter flu.
Yeah.
We've never locked down, shut down anything.
Don't give them
for the
ideas here,
winter
mate.
flu.
Don't give them ideas here.
We shouldn't be doing it for this.
Yeah. Now, I want to move on to another topic, and this, before I let you go, Greg, tricky one for politicians to deal with, but earlier this week, obviously been overtaken by Plan Bs and Christmas parties and cheese and wine parties and the rest of it, but earlier this week, the government announced a 10-year plan to get tough on drug-related crime, a crackdown on middle-class drug users, who some think are slipping the net rather more than others, possibility of having your passport or driving licence removed for drug use, travel bans could actually be introduced for drug use, harsher sentences for drug dealers themselves. Greg, what do you make of this war on drugs mentality? I mean, isn't this, again, virtually everywhere I look, sadly, at this government, there's authoritarian measures rather than liberalising ones. Isn't it time to actually consider a rather alternative approach to the drugs problem rather than this just doubling down on the war on drugs?
I have a very open mind on this, and I get the libertarian argument on this totally. Where I want to particularly focus on the 10-year plan that was announced this week was the criminality end of it, not the drug taker end of it, but the chain of how drugs come to be in this country and how they are peddled currently in this country. And coming out of that, how we help those that are addicted, problematically addicted, not casual use, but serious problem addiction, get through that. There are about 300,000 in this country that are addicted to heroin or cocaine. Mm-hmm. That, along the chain, it's been identified as responsible for something like 50% of all acquisitive crime.
Sure.
So we certainly have to do something about that, and we've certainly got to do something about the way county lines drugs gangs operate, which operate in my constituency, preying on the most vulnerable in our society, particularly children, to go on to peddle these drugs. So we've absolutely got to do something about that criminality that leads to people having their car broken into or their house burgled or violence on our streets. But I'm very open-minded as to how we actually look to the future and have a proper grown-up debate, not the usual Yahoo debate that doesn't use terms like war on drugs and cracking down on this and cracking down on that, to see how we actually approach those substances that possibly aren't actually any more harmful than alcohol or cigarettes, and have a grown-up debate about it.
What's the City AM take on the war on drugs, Sascha?
Well,
I think this was a war that was lost long ago, but we're just not admitting it.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think the war on drugs as a terminology is often used by politicians who feel perhaps like they're losing grip on things, because the law and order point is always a very easy, and especially for Conservatives, to come in and say, we're the party of law and order, we're staging a new war on drugs because this is a new problem apparently. And I think that what does happen a lot when we talk about the war on drugs is there are two policies here really, which often get conflated. There's the county lines problem, which is incredibly difficult to tackle, and that's dealing with that is very much a job for the Home Office, but also a job for schools, and making sure, how do these kids end up so vulnerable that they turn to drugs county lines drug rings in the first place? And then there's the kind of what actually should be a public health concern is the drug addiction and drug use. And there is, there's no case to say that criminalizing drugs has actually stopped people using drugs. So I'm all for trying different things. And, earlier this week, because we started this week, it was called Crime Week, if anyone had forgotten. We started, and Boris Johnson was saying, there is no evidence to say that decriminalization works. But there's not a lot of evidence to say that criminalisation is currently working.
Yeah. So that's a sort of double down thing. Very controversial issue, obviously, for politicians. I can't remember the numbers now, Greg, but wasn't it some sweep of parliamentary bathrooms showed that 12 out of 13 of them had residue of cocaine or something along those lines, something like that. Yeah. And I'm with you that we need to have a more serious debate about it, actually. I'm quite a fan of Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, but I didn't actually like the way he framed it, and I hate this term drug misuse. You might be against drug use, but it wasn't drug misuse. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that people in Parliament were doing anything other than using cocaine in the appropriate fashion.
Misuse suggests they were putting them in their ears or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, exactly. I say, misuse would be using a lawnmower to hoover your carpet or something, right? Whereas this just seems to be like drugs use. Isn't it time to treat this as a health problem more than a crime problem, at least at the user end? I can totally understand, when you're looking at the gangs, organised crime, problems on county lines and the rest of it. But at the other side of it, rather than a crackdown on middle-class drug users, shouldn't we see this as a bit more of a health emergency than Omicron?
I think that's a very good way to frame the debate, actually, to separate the supply chain, the county lines, how drugs come to change hands in this country, and the criminality that goes with that separately to those who either have become addicted, do have health problems as a result of drug use. And if we can do that, that will be the good starting point to have that wider debate about if some decriminalisation will actually work, if it will actually help people both cut crime and get people out of addicted positions. That would be a helpful thing to do and actually move this debate away from good old-fashioned British Yahoo politics.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. That could happen. We'd like to see that happen in a wide range of areas. Greg, I know you need to leave us, so thanks very much for joining us. Great to have you on the show. Thanks for all of the great work you do in Free Market Forum, and thanks for standing up for freedom in Parliament, most especially. Sascha, stay with us. Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. So let us know your thoughts on the war on drugs and the war on Omicron. Let us know how you think you should pronounce that in the comments section or in the live chat. I'm switching between all three. I don't know what the appropriate way of pronouncing it is yet. I'm pretty sure that the government don't have the appropriate way of dealing with it yet. But let us know in the live chat your thoughts on the drugs issue and on how we're handling this new variant, what you think of the government's discussion. While we wait for, we hope another external guest is going to join us, but in the meantime, great pleasure to welcome onto the show my Senior Policy Advisor, Sam Collins. Sam, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you, sir. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
You're allowed to shake hands. Although you're a Kiwi and she's an Aussie, you are actually allowed to be nice.
We're not actually playing each other at cricket at the moment, so we're okay.
Oh, so you're not allowed to be. You're not allowed to be nice to each other. I know you haven't got a drink. Do you need a drink?
I'm good, thank you.
You sure?
Yeah.
God, an Aussie doesn't drink beer. Let's
My note off.
let's stay on the drugs issue for a bit, because Sascha, you made the great point that what's the evidence that criminalisation works? And the Prime Minister saying, well, decriminalisation, no evidence that it works. Well, I don't know about this. I'm not saying this is conclusive, but let's look over to Portugal. They legalised drugs, or at least decriminalised them, I can't remember which it was. Decriminalised. And their drug death rate is 6 per million compared to an EU average of 23.7 per million. There might be other factors at play, but on the face of it, that seems like decriminalisation in terms of fatalities has been good. 18 states, 18 in the US have legalised, decriminalised recreational marijuana. This doesn't seem to have led to use of harder drugs in those states. One of the old arguments used to be the gateway drug effect. You'll start on one and you'll lead to the other. Doesn't seem to have happened. Again, you can, keep looking at the data in different ways. But wouldn't you say there's actually some pretty decent evidence that is in to suggest that a more liberal approach actually does work if health is your prime concern?
Yes, and if health is your prime concern, then it can work. And what actually was done very well in Portugal is, while it was decriminalised, what happened is when people were found to be using drugs, they were sent, they were went to local groups. They were directed to the places where they were supposed to be going to for help if they were misusing drugs. It's not the case that Portugal condones drug use, but there is a lot of investment into making sure people who are caught with drugs do end up actually in a system of, if you need help, this is where you get it.
Rather than me nicking you.
Well, exactly. But also, the point that always gets made to me about the drug deaths is, if drugs are decriminalised, if a kid ends up in A&E having overdosed on something, they're much more likely to tell someone what the hell they've taken if they know they're not going to get in trouble for it.
Yeah. Sam, where are you on this issue? Is a more liberal approach the best way forward to improve health and decrease crime?
I mean, I think unquestionably so. Every time that we've attempted to use prohibition in order to stop people using anything, it just never ever works, and it usually results in a lot more people dying. I think there was a very good piece in the Telegraph the other day by, well, I say very good, but I don't agree with it, but I thought it was well written, by the Conservative London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, saying that that loads of young people are dying from being part of county gangs, county line gangs, and from the trade of drugs. And I would say, well, then the answer to that is legalise the stuff, have it sold in, safe, legal places, allow it to be regulated how what goes into it, regulate the strength, and then you don't have these young people being caught up in county line gangs. You're not going to go and pay a premium for cocaine that you don't know what's on it, that may have rat poison in it, if you can pick it up from your local shop.
I'm a bit worried that the drugs issue in principle, my principled starting point, Sascha, is a very libertarian one. People should be allowed to do what they wish with their own bodies. If you want to have a tattoo or inject yourself with something, it's kind of on you. I'm a bit worried, though, that we're kind of personal autonomy. I mean, the whole war on drugs is based on that you shouldn't have it. And now we're potentially losing it in other areas as well, right? We're not quite forcing people to have a vaccine, but we're telling you that you must be injected with X and you must not inject yourself with Y. Are you worried we're moving increasingly to a society where you don't control your own body and what you do with it and the consequences thereof? What you must have injected is controlled by the government and a whole range of other things that you can't put into your body.
I think there's certainly a case that people feel that it's much more acceptable to comment on the decisions that people make. And I think, while I personally don't approve of people who don't get vaccines because I think they're a life-saving thing, there have been people kind of out there saying, well, why are unvaccinated people taking up hospital beds? Is that fair? And I think that's something, that's the same thing as someone who drinks a lot ending up in hospital with alcohol poisoning, saying, well, you shouldn't drink. Mm-hmm. But and I think the thing with drugs is that the choices that people make may be terrible and they do have a burden on the state, but ultimately that's also the price for freedom. Like, that's the price that we have for living in a country that allows us to do what we want, even if those are really stupid things sometimes.
Yeah. Sam, is that your take on it? Because this is where I get a bit betwixt and between on this. On the one hand, as you know, you're a good friend of mine. I want you to be able to do whatever you want with your body. But on the other hand, I'm not too keen on you sending me the bill. So is Sascha right that kind of the price of a free society is that, or can we have our cake and eat it?
I would say not only is it the price of a free society, I think it's the price of having a publicly funded healthcare system. I think if everybody is, I think if we want to have a system where I'm responsible for paying for my own healthcare, then I bear the cost. That's fine. But if we're going to pool our risk, then you are responsible for the risks I choose to take. And it's absolutely right that it's the price that we pay for a free society, because if we don't, there's so many other things that we could potentially ban people from doing. I mean, horse riding, I think, is one of the most dangerous sports in the country.
Skiing,
definitely.
And don't forget, the skiers started the pandemic.
Yes. I mean, people over
the
40...
skiing tax could end up being pretty high if you want to internalise this externality. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and imagine how much you would have to pay to go skiing once you whack a healthcare tax on top of it. So I think that definitely it's the price that it's the price for freedom, and I, to be honest, think it's a price worth paying. Right,
okay, and I mean, Sascha, a lot of people say if we were to go down the legalisation route, we could have our cake and eat it by taxing it. So, I mean, I'm a bit sceptical of this because alcohol and tobacco tax initially sort of justified for internalising the externality. If every packet of cigarettes smoked costs, I don't know, let's say £1 of health damage, then tax it at £1. But of course, once you got them in, they just ramp up and up and up. But theoretically here, you could see a government revenue stream, and my God, the government seems to need it. Whereas obviously at the moment, drugs costs us money all the way round. We're fighting crime against it. Do you think there's a case for legalising it, taxing it, working out what the cost is of treating people who've taken these various drugs, trying to put that on as a Pigouvian tax on the product and just saying, well, it now sort of pays for itself and we do live in a free society?
I think that there's definitely a case for it, and I think that, as you say, with cigarettes and alcohol and fuel, although the fuel duty has been frozen for quite some time now, we live in a society that taxes the things that we don't like and the things that have negative impacts on our society. So in that sense, yes, legalizing drugs enables us to do something like that. I do also think that it's, once you start getting into the realm of how much does this person's whatever they do cost the health service, you start to get into very tricky territory of what does everyone else owe in terms of what their particular bad life decisions are.
Like you need a skiing tax, a rugby tax, an engineering tax. Yeah.
I mean, on that point though, it's estimated that the marketplace for illegal marijuana, just marijuana alone, is about £2.5 billion. So, I mean, there is a lot of money out there that could potentially be taxed if that was the route you wanted to go down.
Sam, thanks for your thoughts on the drug. Sascha, stay with us. And it's just great. We managed about 15 minutes with a Kiwi and an Australian sitting on the same sofa, and peace broke out. It's almost impossible to believe that is the case. But there you have it. So, not a bad start. I think we put the government to rights on its overreaction to the variant. We've given you the breaking news from the number 10 press conference. Plan B is going into place. The Prime Minister claims that this is proportionate and responsible. You will be asked to work from home for if you can. I think that's from Monday. You will be have to wear a face mask in theatres and cinemas from the end of this week. So restrictions coming in, Plan B in place. And I'm delighted now to be joined by the director of Big Brother Watch, Silkie Carlo. You've made it here, and you've got a glass of red wine. That's important.
Definitely
so welcome.
Have this evening, yeah.
Welcome, Silkie. We've solved the drugs problem and the Plan B problem before. I know, and full disclosure here. I'm a director of Big Brother Watch. Doesn't mean I have to agree with Silkie, but might give you an indication that I will. What's your take on where we're at now, Silkie, on vaccines, vaccine passports? Some places now forcing people to be vaccinated. We haven't gone that far in the United Kingdom. It's not mandatory. These are pretty grim days for Big Brother Watch, aren't they?
Massively. I'm absolutely outraged, and I can't believe what I've just seen on the press conference. On a day when the British public have been so insulted, because it's quite clear that the people in power believe it's one rule for them and another rule, many other rules for everyone else. The absolute audacity of it. So we now have vaccine passports, COVID passports that absolutely no one wants, that are proven failure in Scotland and Wales, that are digital IDs by the back door, internal health passports, checkpoints for our society, the creation of a subclass because some people can't afford smartphones, don't even have printers to try and print out their papers that they then have to carry around. All of this on a day when it's patently clear that there is a different kind of risk analysis going on inside number 10 amongst people that work there as to what is being imposed on everyone else. And I just want to say, it's not about the fact that we're even talking about them being imposed. I mean, I thought we lived in a democracy until fairly recently, but not anymore, because we have someone who stands at a lectern and tells the public the new rules and the laws that they're going to be living under, like a dictator. That's what happens in a dictatorship. Lots of people are going to have different points of view in Parliament, and rightly so. This has to be the fight of our lives, because if this comes through, this isn't just about nightclubs. It's not just about football stadiums. Southampton, obviously, you will be there. This is the beginning. We've seen this happen everywhere else. Once you cross that threshold and you create this fiction that a certain type of person is unclean and they're unsafe and they need to be checked and they need to show their papers and they need to be excluded, that is the top of the slippery slope. And that's where we are right now. So it's going to start with nightclubs. It's going to start with the large venues like we've seen everywhere else. Soon you find yourself in a lockdown for the unvaccinated, or you find yourself in the ridiculous situation in New York and other places, even in Scotland and Wales, where it's just extending and extending out of control. It's the beginning of something. And if we don't oppose this now, and frankly, if Labour don't get themselves in gear and wake up to what's happening under their own noses, we're in big trouble, because it's mostly working class and poor people who are going to be worst affected by this. and they're nowhere to be seen.
Yeah.
So they've got to step up on this issue, because I just can't believe what I've just seen, and I can't believe that we're now on the brink of this horrible dystopian two-tier checkpoint society by digital IDs for no reason. That it's not like he can say, well, it's worked to treat in Wales and Scotland, look at their rates have gone down.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
This is the amazing thing. Sascha, let me come back to you, because I share all of those concerns. But layered on top of that, which Silkie alluded to, there seems to be a determination not even to look at the efficacy. No. So you were mentioning in Australia, different rules in different states. I think they might vary a bit more than they do in the UK, but they sure as hell vary in the UK. Yeah. So we can see whether the Scottish impositions, and you might just be against them on principled grounds, but if you were to put aside principles and just look at efficacy, the evidence seems to be that these have no benefits whatsoever. So even if you put aside worries about civil liberties, worry about excluded parts of the community and the rest of it, doesn't seem to be any evidence this is working, is there?
Yeah, exactly. And look, I think what I have been constantly amazed by throughout, because the whole world's been grappling with this pandemic, right? So in a sense, you've got hundreds of countries with the ability to test out hundreds of different rules, and yet no one seems to look and say, hey, that thing didn't work, let's not do that. Instead, earlier of last year now, we had curfews, and there was no reason that made sense. The introduction of mask rules in some places, but not others. Either you believe that masks work, and, I think that on masks, I think that they're a useful thing, because psychologically they at least tell people that actually there is still a pandemic going on. But it doesn't make sense. There's no sense of this is a blanket uniform policy, and we can say A equals B and it works. And as you say, we have examples of where this doesn't work and where it hasn't worked. Mm-hmm. And vaccine passports especially, I think, there's the risks that come with these things are so great that the payoff that you get. So things like vaccine passports, for example, the risk of disinformation and the risk of distrust in a system that asks you to put all your details into an app. And, I have friends who, they don't watch the news as much as I do, and they're a little bit skeptical about it. They're not kind of in any weird conspiracy theory
I hope
groups.
so.
Yeah.
So there should be. Because there's no evidence for it. You can't point to anywhere and say, well, Israel managed to eliminate coronavirus through their vaccine passport. No, they didn't. Because unfortunately, as we've seen, the situation that we're now in, we've got 90% of people double vaccinated. Unfortunately, vaccines don't prevent transmission, and people still get a bit ill when they're vaccinated and they get coronavirus. So this is the worrying thing. When you have a government that is imposing rules that don't work, and they're all about the theatre of the thing, that is just floodgates are open for anything. I mean, if we're not doing evidence-based policy, anything goes. Why don't we jump up twice to stop COVID? I mean, where does it end? And yeah, exactly. And so where does it end? But in particular, what is frustrating about this is it will have real harms, and distrust is part of it. Look, if you're not distrusting the government by now, you're not paying attention, because they shouldn't be trusted. We're being lied to all the time. We've been lied to about the number 10 party. We've been lied to about the evidence base of some of these policies. We've been lied to about lots of things. And this is a crossing of the Rubicon, I'm afraid, I think. And now we've got the whole of the UK. It's happened piecemeal, because you've got Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and now England. And I'm just hoping that some people in Parliament are going to find a backbone over the next few days and couple of weeks. And this has to be the thing that the government is defeated on. And if they're not, there will be plenty of people in a quite justified way who simply won't comply. I'm going to be one of them, because I grew up believing I lived in Britain, which is a democracy, not a papers, please society. And we won't stop at Parliament, we'll take them to court as well.
Well, that's reassuring to hear that you're running the fight back. Tell me a little, Silkie, I'm going to put two questions to you, actually. They're rather different ones. So let me start with the first one. Is this now the people in power against the people? I mean, we had earlier on the show, Greg Smith, Tory MP, very opposed to these measures. But we kind of reached the conclusion that the opposition to the government seems to be coming, if not exclusively, almost exclusively from their own backbenches. Yeah. Well, that's no parliamentary defeat there then. So you would need about 40 Conservatives and the entirety of the opposition in order to vote down the government. So where is all of this pressure coming from? Because it sort of feels like there is a political establishment in which this debate isn't going on, and there aren't clear dividing lines other than a number of people who largely seem to be on the Tory backbenches, few on the other side of the House. And then the ordinary folk, who I don't know which sort of party they would align with. Is that a fair way of looking at it, or am I being too hysterical?
No, I think that's right. I think it's another case of a kind of bipartisan consensus on authoritarianism that we saw post 9/11 as well, where you had mass surveillance and everything else that came along with that. Suddenly we've got the Labour Party's version of opposition is, for example, on the online safety bill, which is going to be more online censorship than we've ever seen before. If you bring this bill into force quicker, we'll support it. Just bring it in. I mean, they're just like gagging for the restrictions. They just want more and more and more. There's no actual analysis going on. There's no scrutiny. The things that an opposition is supposed to do. Too much of that has been missing. And the police bill is another example. There's just been too little opposition. And you are starting to get that sense again. People have drawn comparisons with the Brexit debate and other debates. You're getting that sense again of it's an elite that seems to have a great deal of consensus around some pretty controversial things, where the majority of ordinary and working class people have a different view. But people are being really battered with fearful messaging as well. And it's understandable that people are scared. And this is an unpleasant time to live through. And I don't want to minimalise the situation that we're in whatsoever. But we're not talking about evidence-based policies. That's the thing. We're talking about the hard stick of authoritarianism, more state control, and actually becoming a checkpoint society. It's quite unbelievable. And it's definitely, if it's one thing, it's definitely un-British. Keir Starmer was right when he said that. We don't do ID cards. I mean, he will remember that from the fight within his own party. We certainly don't do digital ID cards. And I'll be damned if we do medical digital ID cards. That is a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
I was going to put the second question to you. I'll come back to you for thoughts in a minute. We'll go to Sascha. Is Silkie right that this is the crossing of the Rubicon? You can see privacy or liberties being diminished, but there's actually a kind of snap point. And if these vaccine passports come in, then the floodgates are open. That they might start with me having to show something to go to St Mary's Stadium to watch the Saints, or to go to a nightclub. I tend to go to more football matches than nightclubs. That won't be a great surprise to most of the viewers of this show. But then is this a precedent that would start to be applied to absolutely everything? That, what you need to show before you check into a hotel, for example, and all sorts of medical information, and indeed other information. You need to show you haven't been convicted of a criminal offence before you enter a pub, for example. If we can do it for this variant, the logic of that, having got this far, could apply to dozens of other things, millions of other things. No.
Look, I think it's a funny one, because I think we tend to use the words floodgate a lot, and that makes it sound like everything's about to happen all at once. What tends to happen is it's much more insidious, and one thing's normalised, so then another thing gets normalised, and it's actually a very slow creep towards, and we had a similar debate when we talked about voter ID laws, and there was this sense of, well, everyone else has it, so why not us? And I think that there is, especially with something that's health related, where actually you're asked to own up to your own health status. And where does that then go? Are people then going to be asked for other health concerns? And we talked about drugs. If we did decriminalise drugs, would you have to say when you went out for dinner whether you're going to use drugs or something? I think with health especially, which is a very private thing for a lot of people, and it's become normal for us to discuss it very openly during the pandemic. And so, no, I think that's definitely a concern.
So, Silkie, explain to our viewers and listeners, why is this a floodgate moment? So let me put, Sascha was saying about our friends who don't watch the news as obsessively. I guess the argument might come something like this. I don't really understand what this new variant is. We don't know whether it's dangerous yet. Oh, I've got to get this app and passport, but it's only going to be for a few weeks. And I do want to go to that football match or go to this, go and see my favourite band playing or whatever it might be. And then I'm quite sure that by March, I'll be able to delete it and we'll all be back to normal. Why is that too complacent of you? And why do you think this is, if we are on a slippery slope, you only go downwards?
Yeah. Once we are in the habit of showing people our private medical status in order to get access to somewhere as ordinary as a nightclub or a football match, you can't undo that cultural change. You can't undo that psychological change as well that tells you this makes you safe, even though it doesn't. So that's what I mean by a crossing of the Rubicon, is that it's a point of no return, really. Once you do that, bearing in mind we've never even had mandatory national IDs, so we're skipping straight ahead to not only do you have to have your ID and prove who you are, but you have to prove that you've undertaken a medical intervention. That is a completely different thing. I don't believe that tests will stay on there for long. In fact, the government's already talked about making tests paid for. So, that becomes another inaccessible option. Already in the statement today, Boris Johnson said that at the moment it's 2 jabs. Soon it will be, he's intimating soon it will be 3. Mm-hmm. Then it's going to be next winter 4 or 5 or whatever. So, the point is, it's not just about showing, it's bad enough if it's about showing medical status, but it's also about showing compliance with the government's wishes that you have to comply with. Otherwise you are non grata, you are not accepted, you are excluded, and all of this. Add into that the fact that it actually doesn't make anyone any safer. And let me just give you something on this, because I haven't been able to update people and I still can't fully, but Big Brother Watch has begun legal action against the Welsh Government for their COVID pass scheme. I can't say exactly all of the correspondence we've had so far, but let me put it this way. If there were any evidence that the COVID pass is having a beneficial impact on public health in Wales, the government is not willing to share that with anyone, even when faced with a legal challenge on it. Mm-hmm. So we know, I can say with confidence, this isn't anything that's going to make anyone any safer. So the question is, why are they doing it? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There are some people, unfortunately...
And what's the answer to that question?
Well, I mean, it's $1 million question, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I don't believe that the people, the politicians, the elected politicians in government, I don't actually believe they genuinely back this. But I think it's partly a do something policy. Yeah. Partly, I think, on a day when the public has been so insulted by 10 Downing Street with the party that wasn't a party and all of that, it's a distraction. But I think that we also have to be realistic that there are some people that have absolutely wanted digital IDs and medical digital IDs.
And this is the time to get them. They've seen their moment and are striking.
I mean, yeah, it's like what happened after 9/11. There were some people that wanted to have mass surveillance, and that made the argument for mass surveillance a lot more straightforward. There are people in the European Union that long wanted to have an EU-wide vaccine certificate, and the door was just flung open. And if we're going to slavishly follow suit because other countries are doing it, not making any difference to their health situation, but they're doing it. If we're going to slavishly follow suit, then really what was the point in having an elected government? Mm-hmm, What's the point in having people that profess to be libertarians and then are absolutely supine at the moment when it matters most? I think the backbenchers are going to be absolutely up in arms about this, I hope so. But also, unfortunately, and no one wants this, it will divide the public, because there are lots of people that still have a sense of self-respect and still have a sense of British liberty who are going to say, this is where the line is. This is the one thing we're not going to do. We're not going to do medical papers. No.
That's really, really interesting. And Sascha, let me start with you and then Silkie, get your thoughts. Do you think there is a snap point for the British people? I've heard it put to me like this. Actually, generally the British people are pretty compliant, will go along with things, don't immediately... I mean, a contrast, I guess, would be French workers, often take to the streets, the most minimal of reasons, one might say. Here in the UK, I think you could sort of sometimes say that we'll go along with things. We're basically pretty law-abiding. We'll... amble through, make ourselves a cup of tea to get through the afternoon until we snap. right? Until we actually say, whoa, no further, that, I was willing to give you the time of day. Do you think there will be a snap point? Because, actually, if you like, the widespread public resistance to this, which I think more of it could have been covered in the mainstream media, frankly, but it hasn't reached boiling point yet, right? Do you think we might be approaching that point, Sascha?
Look, you're asking a deep cultural question, which I have my own thoughts on. And I think the bigger problem won't be a snap point where everyone says we've had enough. I think the more damaging thing is widespread disillusionment and a widespread sense of, you know what, we don't necessarily trust that the people who are looking out for us, who are our government, actually have any of our interests at heart, or even understand, to be honest, what the hell is going on for us. And whether British people have a snap point, I don't know. I certainly have never seen it, except perhaps for the tube drivers who don't like to drive through the night. The French, and in Europe actually, there have been widespread protests over the vaccine passports. Whether that will gain the same momentum here, I don't know. I suspect it probably won't. I don't think that, I think there's a sense of apathy with the COVID restrictions. I think there's a sense of, oh God, but also, and we saw it with the QR codes, right? You remember last summer when you had to check into everything. Yeah. People just didn't do it. I don't think they'll kind of take their fight to government. I think they probably just won't do it.
Swerve it.
Yeah.
Silkie, what's your take? Because you're on the front line of this day in, day out, and we'll put a link in the show notes below to Big Brother Watch website. Do sign up to Big Brother Watch, fantastic organisation, done a brilliant job of fighting this rearguard action to defend our liberties. But do you think at some point, do you think there is a kind of inflection point at which suddenly, 5 million people join Big Brother Watch and ask for updates? Do you think we're approaching that? Or as Sascha says, might there just be a sort of apathy, general non-compliance, and unfortunately the British population, it's that boiling frog thing, isn't it? If you throw a frog into boiling water, it leaps right straight out, but if you just slowly simmer it up, it boils to death, apparently. I don't know if that's actually biologically true, but it's a good story.
No, it's not, but it is. I've always gone by that.
It's a good... Where do you put Britain at the moment?
I think, look, for anyone who cares about civil liberties, if now's the time, it's a bit past that, now is the time to take action. Now is the time to get involved with groups like Big Brother Watch. Because these decisions are being made very hard, very fast. And we need all of the resources that we can get to put across at least a different point of view. But actually, we really are fighting. We're taking the Welsh Government to court, and we'll be looking urgently into taking legal action against the UK government for COVID passes in England as well. But I think, you've never, any kind of serious political movement or social movement never relies on the majority. Very rarely do you get the majority of the public on any kind of, anti-status quo position. You need a minority of people who are willing and determined to take action when it matters. And I wouldn't be in this job at Big Brother Watch if I didn't have faith in British people that when it matters, we will stand up and we will take that action. And we've always campaigned against ID cards. You've always campaigned against ID cards. This is ID cards on steroids. And I have faith that yet again, which is why I'm a bit worked up, to be honest with you, Mark, because what I've just seen in the press conference is outrageous. I do have faith that enough of us who can see how serious this is will take action. And we've got to fight it head on. But the other thing that we've got to do as well, which is going to be hard, and you've got to think about for your Southampton games, is are we going to comply? Because all of us are now going to be faced with this decision in our everyday things. Someone's going to ask you for your COVID pass. What are you going to say? That's a difficult decision for a lot of people. But I think that is where the action is. Even if you're not working on this day in, day out, that's your moment to make the decision about whether you're going to enable a papers-based society or whether you're going to boycott it and resist it. And I seriously hope that people resist it.
And just finally, Silkie, if people, with your clarion call, if people want to find out more about Big Brother Watch and get involved, they should go to the Big Brother Watch website, yeah?
Yeah, go to bigbrotherwatch.org.uk, go to stopvaccinepassports.co.uk. We've got a crowdfunder where we're raising money for the legal action and the campaign against vaccine passports. We've also got campaigns on free speech and much more. So yeah, if nothing else, subscribe to the emails because you've got action alerts going out when it matters. So.
Silkie, thanks for all the work you do to defend our freedoms. Sascha, thank you very much for joining us for a big chunk of the programme. My thanks too to our previous guests, Greg Smith, Victoria Hewson and Sam Collins. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let us know your thoughts on what's been a very contentious day here in Westminster, either in the live chat if you're watching live or in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed the programme, please hit the thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the IA London YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss anything that comes out from the IA London's broadcasting feed. Also, if you have got a few pennies spare in the run up to Christmas, do consider becoming an IA online patron. Details are in the show notes below. You can join our studio audience next year, assuming we're allowed to meet next year. We would warmly welcome you here. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks to all of our guests. Stay safe, as importantly, stay free. Over and out.